Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. This is Wade Borth, your wealth strategist, and today we're going to talk about perspective. I know there's a lot of people that are saying, what are you talking about, or where are you going to go with this? But I hear this time and time again. We have to accept a new normal. We have to accept the new situation. I was just listening to the news, and I know that's a crazy thing to do nowadays, but this is the new normal. But I would disagree. I think normal is just normal. Today is just today. And I don't know that there is such a thing as a new normal, because everything that we experience as we go along changes our normal. Somebody that's never seen snow, once they've seen that and experienced snow, or somebody had a recent experience with a relative of mine who had never seen or been on ice and fished through ice. And once you've experienced that, there's no unexperiencing that. That's their new normal. Now they know what that experience looks like. So I guess today, the thought process of people saying, now we have to accept our new normal, I just disagree with. I said, we learn things and we experience things, and that is just our normal. And when I look at perspective, when I look up what the definition of it is in Webster, the capacity to view things in their true relationship, or true relations, or relative importance. So think about that, the capacity to view things in their true relations or relative importance. And, where I'm going with this is I get a lot of people that ask me, what do you do? And I say, I teach the infinite banking concept. And they go, I've never heard of that. How come I've never heard of that? Part of it is, you go back to my website, sagewealthstrategy.com, and look up, I've done a podcast and a blog talking about how we're captive of conditioned thinking. We've been conditioned to think a certain way, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not intentionally. But we've been conditioned to think a certain way. And just because you haven't heard about it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I use the example, and I tell this story, it's a funny story, about when I was a child. You obviously see things through a child's eyes. And I think I must have been around 9 or 10 years old. And on our family farm, I believe my parents were out in the field, or out feeding cows, or they were out of the house, and I was in the house by myself, and I just happened to turn on the TV. And it was I believe it was on a Saturday or Sunday, and they had this tennis tournament going on. And I'm not a tennis player, but it captivated me because it said the Wimbledon Championships. Now, I grew up in a small town in east central North Dakota called Wimbledon, North Dakota. And again, let's say I'm a 10-year-old, for lack of remembering exactly what day it was. I'm like, my perspective was there was only one Wimbledon in the whole big wide world. And so I'm like, wow, this tennis tournament's being played in my town. And I'm so excited. So I'm watching this. I'm like, I'm going to go watch this thing live. And we had tennis courts in the little town of Wimbledon, North Dakota. We had tennis courts. So I hop on my little BMX bike that I had, and I tear out as much as I ever tore out on a bike. And I started headed across town, and I saw Dell, who owned the Standard Station on our corner, and I waved at him as I get ready to cross over the busy highway that goes through our town. And Highway 9, I hop across Highway 9 and I get going down the street, and then I get to our main street, and there's the hardware store, and then there's the propane guy on the side of the street that I'm going down with my bike. And everybody knows me in this town because it's only a town of about 300 people. And everybody knows everybody, so they're looking out for me probably because they see me go on my bike all the time by them. And I go by the Red Owl store, and I wave to the people that own the Red Owl store as I go by, and then I go by the bank and the bar, and then the Sanic station. And then on the other side of town, because it happened to be about as far on the other side of town as possible, is our tennis court. And I'm excited, man. I'm like waving, and I'm just driving my bike and pedaling. And I get over there, and there's nothing going on. And I look at my tennis court, which I hadn't really paid attention to that much in my life. And it was one court with a decent net, and it was fairly new at the time, but there was no stands. There was no grandstands like I saw on TV. And I sat there, and what was my first reaction? I was angry. Like, how can this be? And then disbelief. There's no way that this isn't on TV. This has to be on TV, but why isn't it what I see on TV? What's going on here? And so I had to think about from the standpoint of where was I going with with this thought process as a 10-year-old kid. And so I sat there and I thought, again, I started off with disbelief and then anger. And then I had to come to the point of acceptance, like maybe there is something more. So once my mind got around the fact that there's more to this world than my little tiny 300 population town in central North Dakota, my mind started to expand. And then I went back. I pedaled back home. Now, I wasn't pedaling as excited as I was going the other direction, but I was still pedaling back home. I get home and I sit down and I turn on the TV again, and I'm watching the rest of this tennis championship, the Wimbledon Tennis Championship. And I was a little bit disgusted, I have to say. I can't believe it. And I watched it, and I could see the big grandstands. And then what in my mind, and I remember this, is that I had this thought that this world is bigger than what I thought it was an hour ago. So my perspective changed at that time about how big my world was. Could I shrink that perspective again? Could I unsee what I saw? Could I unexperience what I experienced? Absolutely not. So once you experience something, you can't undo that. Once you see something, you can't do that. Once you hear and feel and have something happen to you, you can't have that undone, because now that's part of who you are. That changes your perspective. And so it puts it back, to what Merriam-Webster says, it puts it back in the true relations or relative importance. Was it really important to anybody but me? No, absolutely not. But it put us in a true relationship. We put it in true relationship to where I was in this world, and the fact that I was just one little town, and this was half a world away it was going on. And I thought my little town was the center of the universe. It changed who I was. So when people ask me, they say, I've never heard of infinite banking. I've never heard of this thought process. It's just because you haven't experienced it. But once you see it and once you learn it, now that becomes part of your perspective. Now, you can choose to ignore it. You can choose to demonize it. You can choose to say it's something that's not relative, but it is. Because, again, once you've experienced it, and if you haven't experienced it, if you haven't read about it and you haven't educated yourself, then really what have you done to put it in a true relationship and to put it into its true importance? So when I think about that experience, and when I think about the conversations I have with people around what we do, are there 1,000 ways to do farming? Are there 1,000 different ways to do anything in life? Sure there is. But just because you haven't experienced it at the time doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I guess that's the real key. Just because you haven't experienced something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so all I would ask you to do is to go through life with an open mind. Have conversations with me with an open mind. Because if you don't have an open mind, how are you going to experience how are you going to have these new experiences? How are you going to be able to put it in true perspective of what it is? And that's anything in life. That's when we start talking about finances. If you want to contact me and have a deeper conversation, you can reach me at wade@sagewealthstrategy.com. Go under our website to ask for an appointment and have this conversation. Is there a better way? Is there a bigger perspective? Don't you owe it to yourself? And this is probably the biggest question. Don't you owe it to yourself to say, is there a better way? We've been conditioned to think one way. And until you start asking that question, until you get on your mental bike and pedal your butt down to your local tennis court, like I had to, and discover that, hey, maybe there's a bigger world out there. Don't you want that? Don't you owe that to yourself to have that larger perspective in life? So again, if you want to get on our website, if you want to see what I say about conditioned thinking, go to sagewealthstrategy.com, take a look at the podcast or the blogs. And if you want to reach out to me and have a conversation about how we think, because that's really what I'm getting at, is that how we think about things from that perspective. Again, you might not implement any of it, but you should at least experience and have an understanding what the bigger world looks like. Because right now, most people are in their little Wimbledons of the world, in their financial minds or in their minds in general, because they're in this bubble. Although they might think that they're very experienced, maybe they're not, because they haven't had that opportunity to expand their mind. They haven't looked for their new normal, quote unquote, new normal, which again, I have a real tough time with. And I just think normal is normal. You are who you are through your experiences. And what we've gone through in 2020 is just that. It's part of what our experiences are. There's never really good or bad about those things. There's a lot of things that are happening that are bad, but those experiences are what's going to build you going forward. What's going to build your repertoire of thought processes going forward. If we don't learn anything from this year, then that's a bad thing. If we learn that to expect the unexpected, to imagine things that can never be imagined, a country on lockdown, the world on lockdown. Who'd ever thought that a year ago, as we're looking back at the end of this year? Those things we never would have imagined. Just like I never would have imagined a great big city in England having the same name as me, but have nothing to do with who we are. So as we go through life, as you go through your experiences, take the opportunity to learn other things, to expand your perspective, put things in relative importance about how it is and where it's at in that importance, in the relative importance of things in life. Don't be closed-minded, because if you are closed-minded, how are you supposed to grow that perspective? Wouldn't you want a broader view and broader vision of what's going on? And then once you experience it, and then you can put it all kind of in order. Nelson Nash wrote in his book, he says, if people know what's going on, they'll know what to do. If you know what's going on, you will know what to do. But if you're not willing to learn, not willing to open your mind and change your perspective, how will you know what to do? How will you know what the right thing is to do? So I just ask that you take a moment, have a conversation. It doesn't even have to be financial. It can be a conversation with somebody you disagree with. Open your mind up to their perspective. You might not agree with it. I don't agree with a lot of the things I hear or see, but I try not to be closed-minded. I try to be teachable. I try to not have what Nelson Nash calls the arrival syndrome. That's all about perspective. Those people that think they know everything and seen everything and done everything, they're not teachable, and they're not willing to open their mind to a new perspective. They're not willing to get on their mental bike and drive down to that tennis court because they're comfortable with the fact that they know that they're in their center of their world, and they can't imagine a world bigger than what they are. Quite frankly, those are agents and clients that I probably don't want to work with anyhow, because what can I teach somebody that thinks that they know and have seen and done everything? So as you go through life, I just ask that you keep an open mind, be teachable, don't have the arrival syndrome, and understand that the more you can understand, the more you can expand your perspective, the more you can put it in the relative importance of what it is. Again, all I'd ask is that you take that mental exercise of hopping on your mental bike and running it down to your tennis courts and understanding that there's maybe a bigger world than what you even imagine there could be out there. So when you're having a conversation with me or somebody else about a different idea, different concept, keep an open mind to it, because that is the start to real change in your life, to be able to really have an understanding of what's going on, is having an understanding of all the parts that are going on, not just the part that you think. And sometimes it's hard. And again, I go back to those emotions I had as that little 10-year-old kid that huffing and puffing because I rode my bike so hard to go see this tennis match. I was angry, disbelief, denial. All those things come up right away because it's like, this can't be true. How could this be true? And then you have to come back with that acceptance, and then say, why is that? Ask that question, that really important question. Why is this possible? Why is this even fathomable? It's because when you have that perspective changing on you, it does hurt emotionally. It does challenge you because you're getting outside of what the comfort zone you used to have. And that's a good thing. And then once you've done that, you're never going to go back. You might still do some of the same things you've done in the past, but you're never going to go back to the point where you say, oh, this is the only way to do something. Because you find out maybe there's 20 different ways. Maybe your way is the best. But wouldn't you want to know that? Wouldn't you want to challenge that and say, is what I'm doing today the best that I can possibly be doing? Am I taking control of the banking function of my life? Is that possible? If it is possible, wouldn't you want to do it? And some people are going to say yes, some people are going to say no. But at least if it's there, maybe you don't want to do it today. Maybe you want to do it 6 months from now or a year from now, whatever the case is. But at least it's an alternative to what's going on today. So just remember, when people understand what's going on, they'll know what to do. But part of that, getting to understand what's going on, is to keep your mind open and having perspectives, changing your perspective, and then being able to take all those pieces and parts and put them where they belong in their relative importance. So thank you today. I just ask that you get on your mental bike and go challenge your perspective, go challenge your thought process a little bit. You might end up in the same place that you were when you started with, but you're still going to be better off no matter what the situation is. And then just keep an open mind when you're talking to anybody about anything that's possibly new. Just because you haven't heard about it and you haven't experienced it doesn't mean that you can't. And once you do experience it, and once you do hear about it, you can't unhear it. You can't undo that experience. And that will change how you do